Namaskara and welcome to BIC Talks, a podcast brought to you by Bangalore International Centre, where we present conversations that move, inform, and encourage discourse.
The Ashtavakra Gita asks, who is the doer? I was the doer. I was taking care of my parents. I had ego in that. It was me finally who was doing something for my father who had always done things for me. Who is the doer? Who is it that enjoys and who suffers? When there is no action, what is the throbbing? Since I'm always without my own nature, what are the direct fruits? And in this I found my lesson.
Dr. Hindol Sengupta is a multiple award-winning historian and author of 12 books. Among his accolades are the Wilbur Award given by the Religion Communicators Council of America for his book Being Hindu in 2018, the Valley of Words Prize for the Best Non-Fiction for The Man Who Saved India, and the Kalinga Literature Festival Prize for Best Biography for Sing, Dance and Pray in 2022. He has a doctorate in international relations from the Geneva School of Diplomacy and is a World Economic Forum Young Global Leader. In this episode, Dr. Sengupta will discuss the relevance of a relatively lesser known but fundamental text of the Advaita Vedanta school of Hinduism called the Ashtavakra Gita at a time of global conflict. It will focus on the personal experience of the transformative and redeeming power of the text amidst the turmoil, grief, and uncertainty that is the fate of human life. This episode was adapted from a talk that took place at the Bangalore International Centre in May 2024.
Not too many people know about the Ashtavakra Gita. Presumably, therefore, sales will not be high. Most people don't want to engage with the text. They think it's too dense, so they escape. So why would I do this? And I want to explain to you that the fundamental reason that I do my work is, especially this kind of work, is there is a fundamental problem in India. The fundamental problem in India is that even though we are going through an age where a lot of people talk a lot about the Indian Renaissance, the new age of India, India will rise, our texts are better, this, that, and the other. In my 10, 15 years of doing this kind of work and, as a historian, I have found that very few people actually read the texts. So often, even the polemical conversations are a derivative of social media and not having read a text. This is a fundamental problem. There is another problem. When I wrote my book a few years about Swami Vivekananda, some people told me, why don't we just tell people to go read Vivekananda? That's amazing. If everybody went and read Vivekananda, I dare say, we wouldn't be the country that we are. The fact is, very few people go to the source and read it. Not just because that's heavy and takes time and energy and, perhaps a certain context and training, but also because, and this a lot of young people ask me, in many lectures that I do, okay, fine, so Vivekananda said this. What does it mean to me? I think we in India, no matter which religion and which religious text or philosophical text you're talking about, we have done an inadequate amount of work in answering this question. What does this mean to me? I remember one student of mine, I was giving a lecture on Swami Vivekananda, and I spoke about, what Vivekananda said and so on and so forth. And this young student came up to me and said, all that's very well, but remember, I still have very little money. I have my finals to prepare for. I have this problem at home, all kinds of things. I don't want to go into the details, but he had many problems. And he said, what does it mean to me? The question is, what does it mean to me? What does it do for my life? Because if it doesn't do anything for my life, it's all very well that Shankara said this and Madhava said this and Ramanuja said this and Vivekananda said this. It doesn't do anything for my life. I still have to go out and drive to Shajapur. And that would be a test for everybody, including perhaps Raja Janaka and Ashtavakra. I am being facetious, of course, but you understand the deeper context I'm trying to explain. What does it do for me? So therefore, I have written a book on the Ashtavakra Gita because I read the Ashtavakra Gita at a particularly difficult time in my life, and I'll give you all of that context in the talk. But first, about the Ashtavakra Gita. One of the monks who I'd been talking to for a long time once told me that if the Bhagavad Gita is a beautiful story, it has a context, there is a war, there are warriors, there are armies facing each other, there's a battlefield, there is Lord Krishna himself, as the charioteer, the eternal charioteer, so to speak. There's Arjun, the greatest warrior ever born, so on and so forth. And then there is the Bhagavad Gita. The Ashtavakra Gita is not like a story, it's like a hammer. It hits you straight on the head. Because the Ashtavakra Gita, in fact, and this is, very interesting, you can sum up the Ashtavakra Gita in one sentence. The wise king Janak asks the sage Ashtavakra, how should I be happy? Ashtavakra said, why? Forget the universe and be happy. That's all very well. But it's easier said, you will understand, than done. So over 20 chapters broadly and around 285 shlokas, Janaka and Ashtavakra get into a conversation on what it means to be happy. Here, the word happy, remember, is in a sense not just happiness as we understand it, but it talks about freedom, being free from everything. It is that ultimate bliss that comes from being utterly free, free of the universe, free of your anxieties, free of your doubts, free of your senses, all your desires, free of everything. What happens when you're free of everything, including of your own body and most importantly, your mind? I wanted to write about the Ashtavakra Gita because the Ashtavakra Gita begins with the following shlokas. Let me read it to you. The big Ashtavakra Gita has no story. It doesn't begin by saying Janaka was here, Ashtavakra was here, they had a meal, they came together, they had a chat, nothing. It begins by saying, Janaka asked, how does one acquire jnana? How does one obtain mukti? How does one obtain vairagya? O Lord, please tell me this. Ashtavakra replied, O son, if you desire mukti, cast aside material objects as if they are poison, like nectar, practice forgiveness, uprightness, compassion, contentment, and truth. You are not earth, water, fire, wind, or space. Your Atman is a witness. For the sake of mukti, know that form consists of consciousness. If you separate out of the body and seek refuge in the consciousness, stabilizing yourself there, even now you will become happy, serene, and free of bonds. All very well. When Sri Ramakrishna told Narendranath Datta, who later became Swami Vivekananda, to read the Ashtavakra Gita, Naren flipped through it and came back and said, what is this rubbish? The Brahman is this, the Brahman is that, the pot is the Brahman, the clay is the Brahman, this is the Brahman, that is the Brahman. How can I believe this? Remember, he was a Scottish church educated, Enlightenment young philosopher. And a very valid question. What happened after that is very contextual to what happens when you read the Ashtavakra Gita with care. Narendranath Datta was touched on his hand by Sri Ramakrishna, and he describes that in that moment, he felt everything disappear. All his doubts, all his anxieties. Now, you may think this is one incident which perhaps has been, spoken about too much, hyped, and so on and so forth. But something similar happened to Paul Brunton. When Paul Brunton came to see Ramana Maharishi, he came with a list of questions. What will happen to the world? What will happen to the war? What will happen to disease? What will happen to... There was a whole litany of questions. When he came before Ramana Maharishi, many of you would know Ramana Maharishi didn't speak too much. He was often silent. Paul Brunton describes that for a long time the master was silent. Then he turned his head, opened his luminous eyes. Many of you would know Ramana Maharishi's luminous eyes from the images you have seen, and looked at Paul Brunton. Paul Brunton describes that in that moment, he felt he had no more questions and there was no more answers to receive. All of that had melted away. His questions had melted away. His desire for answers had melted away. Reading the Ashtavakra Gita is a bit like that. If you read the Ashtavakra Gita again and again, Ashtavakra is telling the wise king Janak, it's neti neti. You keep eliminating things from your world, your mind, your senses, your desires, what you wish for, everything. And there's this wonderful thing in the Ashtavakra Gita from where, many of you may use this, but it comes from the Ashtavakra Gita, the rope as a snake. That you see the rope, but you think it is a snake. Therefore, everything that you experience in the material world and with your senses, which are also part of your material world, is essentially the rope. You think it is the snake. Let me tell you a funny story about this. I said this when I was writing the book to another monk. I hang out a lot with monks. And I told a monk about this and said, I found the story amazing and, how this rope and snake. So this monk told me another story about snakes and Sri Ramakrishna. And I want to share that with you. It so happened that there was a snake, a king cobra, as it were, and a monk was passing by. And the king cobra raised his head and, hissed at the monk. The monk got very angry and scolded the snake, saying, "What kind of behavior is this? You have to elevate your life so that your next birth, your life becomes a higher life form until you're freed from the chakra of rebirth. But the behavior that you're showing, I don't have much hope for you." So the much scolded snake slunk away. A week later, the monk came by again and found that the snake had been really beaten black and blue, and said to the snake, "This is very strange. You're a king cobra. Who can beat you like this? You have the ability to kill people in seconds." So this time the indignant snake spoke back. It said, "What do you mean? You are the one who gave me a long lecture saying you mustn't do this, you mustn't do that, lower life form, higher life form. And that's what I did. People came and attacked me. I never hissed at them. I never did anything. They beat me up." So the monk turned to him and to the snake and said, "I told you not to bite, but I didn't tell you not to raise your hood and hiss." Now, this was a very disappointing story for me to hear from a monk when I was explaining to the monk what I understood of the Ashtavakra Gita, as you would appreciate. However, monks do what they do. The moral of the story in this verse, that even in the story of Sri Ramakrishna, of the monk and the snake, even attaching ourselves to the moral of that story would be considered attachment as far as the Ashtavakra Gita is concerned. We may hear that story and read that story and think it's an incredible story coming straight from a spiritual master, but attaching too much importance even to the moral of that story would be considered attachment as far as Ashtavakra is concerned, because Ashtavakra is saying if you attach too much importance even to a moral from life, know that life itself, in a sense, is an illusion. And this rang really deep with me because there is a personal reason why I got into the whole Ashtavakra story in the first place. When COVID-19 happened, for a long time, we were thrilled as a family that we were safe and, we had got our shots and so on and so forth. And, we seemed to have escaped the brunt of the COVID-19 journey until my father had a terrible fall. And when my father had a terrible fall, I realized for the first time that old adage was true, that sons never really become adults until they've seen their fathers bleed. Because only when I saw my father's blood-soaked body did I realize what life and death was really about. And for the first time, truly, I felt that adulthood had reached me. Seeing and contemplating the death of a parent is a very, very interesting thing. You never know how you will respond to it until it actually happens with you. I had a tumultuous period of responding to that crisis, which is when I turned to the Ashtavakra Gita, which used to be at my bedside, and I would read it every day. Every day I would go to the hospital because subsequently my father, it was discovered because of the fall, had got what is known as a hangman's fracture, which usually kills a human being and which is impossible to operate on, especially at the age of 79, which is when he had it. And subsequently, because that loose bone presses on the artery, he got something called the pontine infract, which is a stroke in the pontine part of the brain. The pontine part of the brain controls all your movements, including your breathing. So usually a pontine infract immediately kills a person. So the doctor in one of Delhi's big hospitals gave him 10 days. At a time like this, I found myself going back again and again to the Ashtavakra Gita. I found myself going again and again to the Ashtavakra Gita because if there is one thing the Ashtavakra Gita explains with the greatest lucidity, it is the futility of all attachment. But the truth is, ladies and gentlemen, we are as human beings nothing if not our attachments. We are attached, and that is our human life. And I write in my book, it's very easy to read, realize that the world is an illusion, realize that your mind is an illusion. All of this happens between King Janaka and Ashtavakra. By the way, many of you may think that this is a conversation between, a master and a pupil, so to speak. It's actually not really structured like that. Because remember, King Janak himself is also really, really wise. And many would argue he himself is an enlightened master. So in a sense, if not exactly comparable, this is a conversation happening between two masters. And really, there were days where I would go to my father's ICU and stand outside because, brain injuries, they don't let you in. I would see him and I would come back and read Ashtavakra and Janak in a very pat way, agreeing that yes, everything is an illusion. And on some days it annoyed me. In some days, I actually told some of, friends of mine and that this is one of the problems of reading philosophy or reading spiritual texts, because they seem to suggest to us what we cannot apply in our lives, what we find very difficult to apply in our lives. But as I read the Ashtavakra Gita again and again, some things began to trickle in. And I want to read a little bit from my book to explain to you what really happens. This is from the very last chapter of the book. By the way, in my book, I talk about a whole range of things and how they interact with the lessons of the Ashtavakra Gita, and not just about the Gita. The last chapter of my book is called Sitting Quietly Doing Nothing. Some of you would recognize this is a line from Basho, the great poet. It was Sri Ramakrishna who told the story of a father and his two children to Ishwar Chandra Vidyasagar. A man who had two sons, the father sent them to a preceptor to learn the knowledge of Brahman. After a few years, they returned from their preceptor's house and bowed low before their father. Wanting to measure the depth of their knowledge of the Brahman, he first questioned the older of the two boys. My child, he said, you have studied all the scriptures. Now tell me, what is the nature of the Brahman? The boy began to explain Brahman by reciting various texts of the Vedas. The father did not say anything. But the boy remained silent and stood with his eyes cast down. No word escaped his lips. This is the second child. The father was pleased and said to him, my child, you have understood a little of the Brahman. What it is cannot be expressed in words. Through this period of bruising grief that seemed to never leave my side, it often seemed appropriate to me that I was turning again and again to the Ashtavakra Gita, which said, "O the knower of the truth is never miserable in this world, for the whole universe is filled by himself alone." The name of this, the final chapter of the book, is taken from a haiku by Matsuo Basho, the most revered of Japanese Zen masters. The full poem reads, "Sitting quietly doing nothing, spring comes and the grass grows by itself." If this still sounds like a choice, let me tell you a story. In the middle of spasms of wounded sadness that I felt, sadness that could only end in death, I sought the help of a spiritual master. The monks of the Ramakrishna mission, who I revered, only taught in congregations. So broken was I that I felt I needed individual attention, someone I could work with one-on-one. I had been referred to by someone whose sincerity of approach to an inner life I trusted. I went to meet this master. For the first time, when I went, the master looked at me and asked, "Why have you come so late?" I found myself weeping, and the tears would not stop. I had planned to go again and again, and it seemed that the master had imagined that I would return regularly, but something even stranger happened. I received a phone call from the spiritual master saying I did not need to come again. This was not the moment, this was not the time. And she said to me, "No work has yet started on you, and this is not the time." I had imagined that finally, perhaps finally, I would find solace in her, but it was not to be. The Ashtavakra Gita teaches that the ideal person is ever content, unbothered by acceptance or rejection. Possessing nothing, it says, he roams around as he wills. He is without the opposite pair of sentiments. His doubts has been dispelled. A learned person finds delight only in non-attachment to all sentiments. Whether he is a beggar or a king, a person without desires is splendid. His intelligence is such that sentiments about good and bad have dissolved. Though he sleeps, he is not asleep. Though he dreams, he does not lie down. Though he is awake, he is not awake. A wise person is content in every step. He doesn't desire moksha, nor has he obtained moksha. He is not anything, and nor is it that he is not anything. Even when he is agitated, he is not agitated. Even when he is in samadhi, he is not in samadhi. When he is dumb, he is not dumb. He is blessed because he is learned, but he is not learned. He is self-assured, a state that is like liberation. I had been abandoned, though, despite these great lessons from the Ashtavakra Gita, even in the quest of a very personal salvation. I had imagined in my grief a renunciation of sorts would liberate me, but even that had been turned out to be another kind of bondage. It was the Ashtavakra Gita that showed me that even my quest to find a spiritual master, in the moment when I was confronted with my father's death, was itself an act of bondage. And in seeking that bondage lay one more of my very human mistakes. And it is only by reading the Ashtavakra Gita that I understood that even when faced with your own parents' death, seeking spiritual solace and, in a sense, trying to find a crutch in a spiritual master is a different kind of bondage. Now, this is terribly difficult to understand or comprehend unless you've experienced this yourself. This is rejection at a very, very personal core. This is abandonment at a very personal core. This strikes at the very sense, at the very deep roots of our very self. Now I was utterly alone, surrounded by the sheer absence of sound I had never thought was possible. The world around me had quietened. I felt an aloneness that I had never felt before. It seemed like the removal of all things. But what remained? When Mary Oliver, one of my favorite poets, felt alone, she went to the woods. Mary Oliver wrote, "I too have known loneliness. I too have known what it is to feel misunderstood, rejected, and suddenly not at all beautiful. O Mother Earth, your comfort is great. Your arms never withhold. It has saved my life to know this. Your rivers flowing, your roses opening in the morning, O motions of tenderness." Susan Green, a meditation teacher in Princeton, once spoke about the correlation between Mary Oliver's poetry and the profound wisdom of the Ashtavakra Gita. She picked up Mary Oliver's one poem and spoke about how it contains nuggets and reflections of the non-attachment and the wisdom of non-attachment that the Ashtavakra Gita teaches. And that poem of Mary Oliver is called "I Am Not the River." It says, "I'm not the river, that powerful presence, and I'm not the black oak tree whose patience is personified. I am not red bird whose a brief life heartily enjoyed, nor am I mud, nor rock, nor sand, which is holding everything together. No, I am none of these meaningful things, not yet." As Green correctly pointed out, this is pregnant with the echoes of the Ashtavakra Gita. What is the Brahman? It's neti neti, not this, not this. The Ashtavakra Gita declares, "I am established in my own glory." What is dharma? What is karma? What is artha? What is discrimination? What is duality? What is non-duality? I am established in my own glory. What is the past? What is the future? What is the present? What is the region? What is eternal? I am established in my own glory. What is the Atman? What is not the Atman? What is auspicious? What is not auspicious? What is reflection? What is not reflection? I am established in my own glory. What is dreaming? What is awake? What is turiya? I am established in my own glory. What is gross? What is subtle? What is inside? What is outside? What is death? What is life? Where are the worlds? What is samadhi? I am established in my own glory. Basho had sought this sort of solitude too, and found it finally at home, like Mary Oliver, in the woods. And when I read all of these things, I recalled this incredible story of the Buddha, which I want to share with you. After the Buddha attained enlightenment under that tree, he was walking out of the forest. And the Buddha was asked by the people who met him, "What are you?" One person asked him, "Are you a beast?" He said, "No." Somebody else asked him, "Are you an animal?" He said, "No." Somebody else asked him, "Are you man?" "No." Somebody else asked him, "Are you God?" He said, "No." Finally, when he was exiting the forest, somebody asked him, "So what are you?" And the Buddha said, "I am awake." And this so profoundly spoke to me as I was reading the Ashtavakra Gita in the moments of this turmoil, that perhaps we seek salvation always in bondage, whereas we ought to perhaps seek it in simply being awake. And that truly spoke to me. I wondered why this doesn't come easily to us. I follow this great, Ramakrishna Mission master who gives a lot of talks, Swami Sarvapriyananda. Many of you may have seen his talks on YouTube. There is this one talk where he talks about the Drigdrishya Viveka, another great book. And he talks about how there's this man who went to a spiritual master and said all these problems and stuff. And the master said, "See, this is the problem. You are unhappy because you are attached to all these anxieties in your mind." The man went away, came back a few days later and said, "Master, I am thrilled. I have left behind all the anxieties. I've understood this is all attachment. Now I'm supremely calm." The master said, "See, this is the problem. You are absolutely attached because you're calm." The moral of the story is, whether in calmness or in anxiety, to be attached to the notion of being anxious or being calm is where the problem lies. Why are we not able to get to that phase? Why are we not able to reach that phase? Swami Vivekananda told a story. Suppose a carriage is drawn downhill by 4 powerful horses, and you're the rider in that carriage. It is so easy to go down the hill, but suppose you restrain the horses, hold them back with such strength that the horses want to gallop, and then there is the hill which is rolling down, but the carriage is standing still. Consider that silence, consider that meditation. There is a downward hill, the horses want to gallop forth, you're holding back the carriage. That is your mind that shouldn't gallop forth. And he thought that was meditation, that was freedom. But this, I obviously could not reach this point because I kept feeling the carriage of my grief coming tottering all over me. And I read the Ashtavakra Gita, which said a person may be empty inside, but outside he wanders around as he wills, as if in a deluded state. Such a state can only be known by those who are like him. When I looked at my parents, especially my father, the infirmities I felt with a certain new gaze descending upon me, and my own duties and concerns, in a moment, and I share this with great guilt, I felt this was restrictive in my life. My duties towards my ailing father, this was my bondage. I had to be free from these duties. And yet, just the thought of that filled me with great, impossible to endure guilt. That such a thought could come in my mind filled me with distress and unhappiness. And I turned again to the Ashtavakra Gita, which said, "There is no doubt that your form is truly that of pure consciousness. The universe arises within it like waves in the ocean, to be devoid of anxiety. But my duties had become a burden on me. The reason I was failing to do justice to them was not because, as I understood, I was not making enough effort, but, and here's the interesting learning, that other learning that I really gathered during this moment of great turmoil. It is not because I was not doing enough for my father or my parents that I felt this desire to shed all my duties and run away. It is because I was not spending enough time to really free myself in my mind so that I could perform my duties without attachment." This is a hugely contradictory thing, and perhaps I will never do justice in explaining this. But I really felt, and this is something that perhaps can only be felt, that if only I could bring that silence in my mind that the Ashtavakra Gita was so telling me about, if I could bring that freedom in my mind, I would be able to really do justice in my performance as a dutiful son to my ailing father without the attachment. The attachment made me resentful because it made me think of what is going to happen if he dies? What will be my future? How much grief will I feel? How much abandonment will I feel? Am I doing enough to balance out what he had done for me? But the Ashtavakra Gita taught me that there is no such moment. You can never do enough. This moment will never come. And right at the end, in spite of many, meditative practices and many other efforts to quieten my mind, it was finally the Ashtavakra Gita that showed me some path. The Ashtavakra Gita asks, who is the doer? I was the doer. I was taking care of my parents. I had ego in that. It was me finally who was doing something for my father who had always done things for me. Who is the doer? Who is it that enjoys and who suffers? When there is no action, what is the throbbing? Since I'm always without my own nature, what are the direct fruits? And in this, I found my lesson that all things in the end must come to this nothing but the truthness. I realized what the Ashtavakra Gita felt like finally was not a sermon, was not great sagacious advice, was not words of wisdom from a master, but it felt like the only thing we are deep within concerned about. It felt like coming home. It felt like returning home. I'm very connected to the ISKCON movement, and Srila Prabhupada said, we must all finally return to the Godhead. Our final destination is to return to the Godhead because our home is only with the Godhead. The Ashtavakra Gita felt like coming home. But as we all know, the choice to return home is always fraught with indecisiveness and peril. But no matter what our choices, home is there somewhere waiting within us. The Ashtavakra Gita allowed me to feel that even though my choice of accessing home or not was fraught with peril, home was there. It was within me, and it was waiting. The Ashtavakra Gita asks, what is Maya? What is samsara? What is attachment? What is detachment? To me, who's always sparkling, what is the Jivatma and what is the Brahman? And even these questions have limits to their usefulness, for it ends by saying, what exists? What does not exist? What is unity? What is duality? In this connection, what is the need to speak a lot? Who can really understand this? Who can really understand why we cannot stop speaking a lot? One of the people who I have been fascinated with and read a lot and saw a lot of his lectures was Jiddu Krishnamurti, a man, again, extremely concerned with freedom. So as I was reading the last lines of the Ashtavakra Gita, which asks, what is it that stops us from stopping to talk? I saw a video of the last lecture of Jiddu Krishnamurti, the last public lecture he ever gave. And this is what happens in that video at the end as he finishes his lecture. And it made me think, what then stops us, you, me, all of us? If this is so easy, if the Ashtavakra Gita exists, if our flawed lives exist, if it is so easy to understand this, what keeps us from being wise? Why are we still so flawed? Why are we still so attached? Why are we still so burdened? Why are we still so unwise? What stops us? When the sun set on his last public lecture, Jiddu Krishnamurti asked his audience in Chennai, do you want to sit together quietly for a while? All right, sirs, sit quietly for a while. But already, behind his low-rise stage, one can see people starting to get up immediately. Some even walking out and leaving, some chattering. Some even cross the camera recording and bump into it, blocking the view for a couple of seconds. Jiddu Krishnamurti himself is quiet, his white wavy hair moving just a little in the breeze, his eyes watery as if from tears as he raised them heavenwards. He then asks, may we get up and go now? Immediately the crowd jumps to its feet. Slowly, sir, slowly. Don't, he says. And as I ended the Ashtavakra Gita, and as I saw this video, I was reminded of what the Buddhists call the monkey mind, the Hindus talk about. Swami Vivekananda was very concerned about this whole monkeys business. Perhaps at the end of it all this wisdom exists, all this freedom can be accessed, and yet it can only be accessed if we can sit quietly for a moment, as Basho had wanted us to do, if only we can sit quietly and do nothing. And in that, I realized lay the greatest lessons of the Ashtavakra Gita. Freedom perhaps would only come to those who can sit quietly for a moment and agree to do nothing in a world so concerned all the time of doing everything.
You have been listening to BIC Talks by Bangalore International Center. If you like what you heard, do follow us on social media. Keep up with our programming by signing up for our mailer on the website or leave us a review or rating on Apple Podcasts or iTunes. The crew that makes these podcasts possible is Gaurav Krishna and Ishan Gupta on sound supervision and production, with support from S. Sarunaraj and Raghu Tenkaila. Artwork is designed by Chandni Venkataraman of Crisscross Design Studio. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel on your favorite podcast platform. It can also be accessed on our website, bangaloreinternationalcenter.org. This is Lekha Naidu signing off on behalf of everyone at BIC.